Hello everybody, I'm Grant Fluff from Flusher Sports Zone and welcome back to another YouTube video. Episode 4 of Hall of Fame or Hall of Good. This will be the wide receiver edition. We've already done quarterbacks and 2 additions. That's right, 2 additions for running backs. But we got the wide receiver edition ready to go. I think this will probably just be a one-parter, and then we'll move on to tight ends before we head over to the defense. By the way, I pick out 15 players for each episode. For tight ends, there's a slight possibility. I haven't done my research yet because I'm taking this one by one, but there is a slight chance I'll only pick 10 tight ends instead of 15, but we will cross that bridge once we cross that bridge. Welcome back to another edition of Hall of Fame or Hall of Good, where we recap retired player statistics and I just give my God honest opinion on them. Do they belong in the Hall of Fame or do they not? Some of these I'll get really passionate and others I won't seem to care as much. Let's get right into it with Reggie Wayne, who retired in 2015. He should probably have already been inducted into the Hall of Fame. I don't know if that's giving away my answer or not. He made 6 Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro, over 14,000 regular season receiving yards along with 82 touchdowns. He was obviously part of the Colts Super Bowl 41 championship team. He had over 1,000 receptions in the regular season. He also had 9 career postseason touchdowns along with 1,254 yards. So, I think with that being said, Reggie Wayne should be in the Hall of Fame. He was very consistent with Peyton Manning. He even put up 960 yards with Curtis Painter as his quarterback in 2011, and then had a decent final 3 years with Andrew Luck. From 2012 to 2014, making his last Pro Bowl in 2012 with 1,355 yards. His best season all around, 2007, where he led the league in receiving yards with 1,510 with 10 touchdowns, and his career high in touchdowns was in 2004, 1,210 yards and 12 touchdowns. Very surprised he didn't make the Pro Bowl that year. That should be a 7 Pro Bowls on his resume, not 6. But yes, Reggie Wayne, absolutely Hall of Famer. It kind of sucks that he has to wait, and he may have to wait just for a little bit longer, but he absolutely is a Hall of Famer. I don't care what anyone says. Now, next we have another AFC South legend, very underrated player, Jimmy Smith. Now, granted, usually I love to sweet talk the Jaguars, obviously being a Jaguar fan myself. I love to be like, Jaguars player, he should be in the Hall of Fame. Here's why. But for Jimmy Smith, he had over 12,000 receiving yards, 67 regular season touchdowns. He had the most catches in the league in 1999 with 116 receptions, which was 1,636 yards, his best yardage by a mile. The lowest touchdowns he ever scored in a season was 0 with the Cowboys in 1992. Then he injured his appendix, didn't play until the Jaguars picked him up in their expansion year in 1995, and then 1996 when the Jaguars got Mark Brunell, he went off. He got 1,000 plus receiving yards from 96 to 2002. He probably would have made 1,000 yards in 2003 as he had 805 yards in just 12 games. And yeah, 67 career regular season touchdowns. We flip it over to the playoffs. 7 career playoff touchdowns along with 647 receiving yards. So at the end of the day, he's at 12,000, roughly 900 receiving yards with about 74 touchdowns. Yeah, that's a Hall of Fame career. The thing is, Jimmy Smith, and I hate to say this, the reason why he's not in the Hall of Fame is because, well, he played on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it really pisses me off to say it, but it's true. If this guy played with a better quarterback than Mark Brunell. Let's say, for example, if he played on the Dolphins with Dan Marino, or the Broncos with John Elway, or the Packers with Brett Favre, there's a very good chance Jimmy Smith is currently enshrined in Canton. But no, because he played on the Jacksonville Jaguars, only made 2 AFC championship games when he was on the team, and Mark Brunell was the starting quarterback for the majority of the years, minus the last couple of years where it was Byron Leftwich and David Garrard. Those aren't great quarterbacks. Jimmy Smith, despite putting up amazing numbers every single season from 1996 to when he retired in 2005, it doesn't matter. Like, he even got 1,000 yards in his last season. 2005, 1,023 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, that is tremendous for a guy who was about to retire, and it's a joke, again, that he's not in the Hall of Fame already. He absolutely should be in my book. I think he will get inducted soon, especially now that Tony Vaselli got in the Hall of Fame. I do think guys like Fred Taylor, Jimmy Smith, maybe Maurice Jones-Drew, maybe Tony Brackens, they might just sneak into the Hall of Fame now that we actually have a Jaguar in there, finally. I mean, Vaselli was 5 years overdue. Smith's been like 10 years overdue. I cannot believe I'm sitting here in 2022 trying to explain to NFL historians and Hall of Fame ballots that Jimmy Smith belongs in the Hall of Fame, because he does. 12,000 receiving yards. Right there is enough proof. With, again, remember, his best ever quarterback was Mark Brunell. That tells you something. Disregarding the 7 games he played with Troy Aikman in 1992. Anyway, moving on to Andre Johnson. I guess I want to bang out the AFC South out of the way. Andre Johnson, he was up for ballot this year. Somehow didn't get in. 7 Pro Bowls with 2 All-Pros. He spent his entire career in the AFC South, obviously spending most of his career with the Texans before retiring as a member of the Colts and the Titans after the 2016 season. He had 70 career regular season touchdowns. His 2 All-Pro seasons came in 2008 and 2009, where he led the league in receiving yards both those years. He also led the league in receptions twice in 2006 with 103, in 2008 with 115. In 08, of those 115 catches, he had 1,575 yards, and in 2009 led the league again with Matt Schaub, 1,569 with 8 and 9 touchdowns that year, respectively. And actually, that 9 touchdowns in 2009, that was surprisingly his career high in a season. I mean, that's the only knock what you would probably have against him, not being a first ballot Hall of Famer. But again, I think he absolutely should be. Kind of crazy he has to wait another year. This guy made his first ever Pro Bowl, a second year in the league, with 1,142 receiving yards. And this guy even scored 6 touchdowns as a member, again, of the Colts and the Titans in those 2015-2016 seasons where he was just a wide receiver 3. I mean, again, his playoff stats aren't great. He had 1 receiving touchdown in 2011 against the Bengals. That was pretty much about it. He only had 358 receiving yards. But when you bring up Andre Johnson, you got to talk regular season statistics because, again, he was on the, well, not the expansion Houston Texans, but the 2003 Houston Texans. You know, that's the guy who's been around David Carr, Matt Schaub, TJ Yates, like Brian Hoyer. Like, oh, my God, those are some terrible quarterbacks. Granted, Schaub wasn't awful, but he wasn't good. He finally had a good quarterback in 2015 with Andrew Luck. Luck was injured for half the year, so he got to play with, oh boy, and out of his prime Matt Hasselbeck. And in 2016, he played with Marcus Mariota. Wow, those are some great quarterbacks. Again, the fact he managed, it's just like the Jimmy Smith situation. The fact that this guy has over 14,000 receiving yards with those atrocious quarterbacks at the helm is all but proof that he should be in the Hall of Fame. I get it. He was so talented. He was the wide receiver 1. He might have been the only receiver the quarterbacks targeted, but that's not his issue. You should appreciate that and use that as a reason to put him in the Hall of Fame because he was so much talented above all those guys. I mean, you want to talk about best receivers from the late 2000s, right? You have Calvin Johnson at number 1, maybe Randy Moss at number 2, and then Andre Johnson's 3. He's 3. Simple as that. Yeah, sure, Wes Walker was great. Derek Mason was great. A couple of other guys were great. But you want to talk about primary late 2000 receivers, Johnson's 3 in that category. Moving on to Devin Hester. All right. Now, yes, he is technically labeled as a receiver. He's a kick returner, technically. Dude, he's a receiver. So we're going to count him as a receiver. And just like Andre Johnson, retired in 2016, he had a shot to make the Hall of Fame first ballot this year. And it's a damn embarrassment he didn't, let me tell you that much. Another one who should have been first ballot, no problem, robbed. Sure, he only had 3,000 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns. Again, when you bring up Devin Hester, we're not talking about the fact that he was a receiver. We're bringing up the fact that he was the most dominant return man in NFL history. 4 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pros, made the Hall of Fame 2002 and 2010 team. Let me take a look at some of his returns, shall we? Wow, he also had never mind. I'm about to say I thought he had more than 1 rushing touchdown in his career. But no, so 17 regular season non-kick return touchdowns. All right, let's take a look at his kick returning statistics here. All right. Led the league in touchdowns 3 times. Led the league in yards twice in 2006. 47 returns, 600 yards, 3 touchdowns. And that's not including his kickoff return touchdown, which you can see right there on the picture to kick off Super Bowl 41. 2007, another All-Pro. 651 punt return yards, 4 touchdowns. 2010, punt returns, 564 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, punt. Let's take a look at his kick return touchdowns from those years. In 2006, 20 kick returns for 528 yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2007, remarkable 934 yards and 2 touchdowns. 2010, 427 kick return yards. In 2013 and 2014, led the league in punt yardage back-to-back years. He didn't score a touchdown. He scored a kick return touchdown with the Falcons, or rather a punt return, not a kick return. But in 2013 with the Bears, 1,436. That's probably the all-time record for return yardage in a season. And then in 2014 again, led the league 1,228. This guy was the greatest return man in NFL history, all right? And I don't care. Pro Football Reference has him as the 72nd best wide receiver in NFL history. It's a joke. Again, you don't grade him off his 3,000 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns. You grade him off the, wait for it, 3,695 punt yards on top of the 7,333 kick return yards. That right there is well over 11,000. 11,000 total return yards. And that's not even getting into his receiving and rushing statistics. Again, just like Andre Johnson, absolute joke. He was not first ballot this past year. Ridiculous. Hester, he better get in or else. I'm putting it to you this way. And I am kind of comparing apples to oranges here because I am about to compare a return man to a kicker. If Devin Hester does not get in next year, then that is all but proof Adam Vinatieri will not be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And you want to know why that is the case? Because Pro Football Hall of Fame apparently has something against special teams players. That's always been the case. Brian Mitchell is in the Hall of Fame. Sean Lindetta isn't in the Hall of Fame. We've known this for a while. Guys like Devin Hester, not first ballot first year. Guys like Adam Vinatieri, Justin Tucker, Johnny Hecker, I'd be sweating if Devin Hester does not get in next year. And that means that you will likely not be first ballot, or you will eventually get into the Hall of Fame, but you're going to have to wait a very long time. And again, just for the fact that you weren't a quarterback, or just, you just played on special teams and you just get shafted in NFL history. It's ridiculous. Next up, we have Muhsin Muhammad. Well, we were 3 for 3. Let's see if we can go 4 for 4 here on players who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. Muhammad didn't have a bad career. He played from 96 to 2009 at 11,000 receiving yards, 62 touchdowns, 2 Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro. His 1 All-Pro season came in 2004 where he led the league in receiving yards and touchdowns. 1,405 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns, by far his career best. Actually doubled his career best. 8 in 1999, which was his first Pro Bowl season. And the playoffs, he did make the playoffs a few times with the Panthers and the Chicago Bears. 558 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns there. So we're looking at roughly 12,000 yards and 65 touchdowns in well over 200 career games. I know what you're thinking. On the surface, is Muhsin Muhammad a Hall of Fame player? Most of you, unless you are a diehard Panthers or Bears fan, would probably say no. And this one's tough because he does have the 11,000 yards, which in my opinion is enough. You would clip the 10,000 yard mark. You basically get Hall of Fame recognition from me. That's kind of how I work. Again, I don't know if Muhammad's getting shafted because the best quarterback he ever played with was Jake Delhomme. I don't know what the deal is. But what I will say is that he has the statistics to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, sure, you'd like to see more than 2 Pro Bowls out of a Hall of Fame player. And I think this is one of those rare cases where even though he necessarily meets my requirements to make my Hall of Fame, Canton, Ohio is going to say no. I think Muhammad should be in the Hall of Fame. Again, he should wait. And based off the people on this list, I do think he is one of the last entries I would put in. But with that being said, he does meet my yardage requirement to at least go up for ballot. His touchdowns, again, with very mediocre quarterbacks, it helps me give a little sympathy for him, makes me want to put him in the Hall of Fame, maybe more than a couple of other receivers who may not be in. So, though I do think Pro Football Hall of Fame will say absolutely not, I think absolutely. Muhsin Muhammad should be in the Hall of Fame. I know that one's a borderline one. He is, like I mentioned, he is the least one I would put in right now. Like, I would literally put it in this order right now. Wayne first, Smith second. Actually, no, probably Johnson second, Smith third, Hester fourth, Muhammad fifth. But don't worry, I know we're going to get to some guys I am unfortunately going to have to make some hard cuts on the Hall of Fame. We may have to revisit Muhammad if I literally put everyone in the Hall of Fame. That's kind of the point of this video, to put who I want in the Hall of Fame. But, I can't just say, all these 15 players are going to make it just because I want them to, and because they have the statistics. There will be a couple of hard ones that we will have to make. And I think, unfortunately, our first victim is going to be right here. Mike Quick, our 6th receiver on the board. So he has 5 Pro Bowls, 2 All-Pros, 6,464 yards and 61 regular season touchdowns. If Harold Carmichael and Terrell Owens do not exist, he is the greatest receiver in Philadelphia Eagles history. He only played in 1 playoff game, had 82 yards in that, so we're not going to count playoffs towards this. His first All-Pro season, 1983, with Juan Jaworski as QB. He led the league in receiving yards with 1,409, 13 touchdowns. That was 20.4 yards a reception. Very good there. And he did score a 99-yard touchdown in overtime in 1985 against the Atlanta Falcons. The only 99-yard walk-off in NFL history. Ron Jaworski to Mike Quick in 1985. However, he only had those 3 seasons from 83 to 85 where he had over 1,000 receiving yards, and he had 939 in 1996. But he never eclipsed 800 yards after that 86 season. 87, he made his last Pro Bowl with 790 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. And then from 88 to 90, he was basically, he wasn't terrible. He was just a role wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 receiver, only catching 6 touchdowns and about 800 yards over that span. Great prime, but his prime lasted too short. Again, if I could put all these guys in the Hall of Fame, I would. Not saying Mike Quick won't be in the Hall of Fame like 50 years from now, but let's be real. If Harold Carmichael, Drew Pearson, if those guys had to wait like a really long time to make it, and again, guys like Andre Johnson, Reggie Wayne, they didn't even make it first ballot. Devin Hester, Mike Quick is still going to have to wait a very long time. I got to say, for the first time in this video, a player will not be making at least my Hall of Fame, and I don't think Canton either. But Mike Quick, I'm sorry, my friend. Very good receiver again, but his prime only lasted essentially 4 seasons, and only 3 1,000-yard seasons probably isn't enough, especially since he didn't meet the 10,000-yard requirement. I would personally do. The Pro Bowls made it intriguing for a second, but I gotta say no on Mike Quick, and that's unfortunate because again, I want all these guys to make the Hall of Fame, but at the end of the day, you gotta make tough decisions, and Mike Quick's gonna be a no for me. Keyshawn Johnson. So we go back from the 80s back to the early 2000s. Johnson, 1,571 receiving yards, 64 regular season touchdowns, and he did win a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers and played in quite a bit of playoff games, 39 catches for 569 yards and 2 touchdowns. So 11,000 yards, including the playoffs. Made over 1,000 yards 4 times. 1998 with the Jets. That was his first Pro Bowl appearance. It was career high with 10 touchdowns. This is a tough one because, again, it's kind of like Mike Quick. It's like he had a great prime. It was all kind of jumbled up, though. He had some great years with the Jets. He had some great years with the Buccaneers. And then just had mediocre seasons with the Cowboys and Panthers before retiring. But again, he meets that requirement, and he had the 3 Pro Bowls. He didn't make an All-Pro, which kind of sucks. If he made an All-Pro, I would definitely say, he's in, right away. I would probably be going out rant about why isn't he in the Hall of Fame right now, right? I think he is. Especially if I put Muhsin Muhammad in the Hall of Fame. That means Keyshawn definitely gets in too, considering they're essentially the same exact player. It's just Johnson's had better seasons, but Muhammad had the All-Pro season. You add it all up, they're essentially the same player, both with 11,000 receiving yards. And both ended their careers with the Panthers, oddly enough. But, yeah, no, for me, Keyshawn Johnson's a Hall of Famer. Again, I'd probably put him in before Muhammad, but again, well after Wayne, well after Johnson, well after Hester, well after Smith. But definitely before Mike Quick and maybe even before Muhsin Muhammad. But I do think Keyshawn Johnson's a Hall of Famer. Again, I kind of understand the reasons why he's waiting, and he's going to have to wait for a long period of time before he does get in. But he was so instrumental to the 2002 Buccaneers, and he was honestly, as much as I hate to say it, despite only playing 4 years on the Jets, he is probably a top 3 receiver in Jets history at 31 receiving touchdowns. I mean, Don Mangart's the clear-cut number 1, but, who would be the second best receiver in Jets history? Al Toon? And then Keyshawn Johnson's number 3? It's really slim pickings after the great Don Mangiard. So I think for that reason alone, Johnson, top 3 probably in Jet receivers of all time, and he's probably also top 5 in Buccaneer receivers. I'd say give it to Johnson, especially since he had the Super Bowl and the 3 Pro Bowl years. Why not? Moving on to Chad Ochocinco. All right, this is another one that I got to complain about real quickly. Over 11,000 receiving yards, 67 career touchdowns. Yeah, he had 10,783 of those 11,000 plus yards with the Bengals. He is the greatest Bengal receiver of all time. People from the 80s might say Chris Collinsworth, and, people from today, if they don't say Chad Johnson, they're going to say A.J. Green, or maybe a decade from now, Jamar Chase. But let me tell you something. Chad Johnson, he probably would be in the Hall of Fame by now. And I hate to say it, but like I've been saying about Jimmy Smith and Andre Johnson, it's because he played on the Bengals and his best quarterback ever was, well, excluding Tom Brady in 2011, was Carson Palmer. Ticks me off. It really does. Johnson, if he plays on the Patriots for longer than a year, if he plays on the Cowboys for his prime, if he played on the 49ers in his prime, if he played with a quarterback like Drew Brees or Peyton Manning in his prime, he would be in the Hall of Fame with the exact numbers he has today. Another reason why Johnson may not be in the Hall of Fame right now is because he was one cocky son of a bee. I will not sugarcoat. He got fined a lot in the NFL. But again, if the NFL lets guys like, if they're going to let guys like Ndamukong Suh eventually in the Hall of Fame, and they have like Paul Hornung in the Hall of Fame who gambled on games and whatnot. Granted, I know that was back in the 60s, and that's kind of stretching the truth, but you know what I'm saying. How is this? If Antonio Brown is a Hall of Fame receiver for all the crap he did off the field, then Chad Johnson's easily a shoo-in. Now, granted, I know all time Antonio Brown's better than Chad Johnson, but I'm just saying on the aspect of, well, if you're not letting Chad Johnson get in the Hall of Fame because he played with because he got fined often, that's just his character, man. And plus, Terrell Owens is in the Hall of Fame. Like, come on, man. You're gonna let one in but not the other? Again, I know Owens had a better career than Johnson, but for crying out loud, it's just another situation of the Bengals are a small market team, and because the best quarterback ever, again, excluding Tom Brady in 2011, his best ever quarterback was Carson Palmer and Ryan Fitzpatrick and John Kitna and whatever other random Bengal quarterback, and Jordan Palmer, Carson's brother, and whatever other random quarterback you want to name from the early 2000s Bengal teams. Achilles Smith, Jeff Blake. Again, great receiver with horrible quarterbacks. Show the respect and put him in. Ridiculous, man. Mark Clayton is up next. Now, this is an interesting one because he played 10 years. He had 84 career touchdowns, 8,974 receiving yards, 83 and 92 with the Dolphins before playing 1993 with the Packers. He led the league in touchdowns twice in 1984 with 18 and in 1988 with 14. Mark Clayton is very easily a guy where if Dan Marino wasn't his quarterback, he may have not even eclipsed 3,000 to 4,000 career yards. But again, the Hall of Fame is never a what-if game. It's a what we have in front of us game. And the 8,000 receiving yards, especially the 84 touchdowns with the 5 Pro Bowls. Again, he never made an All-Pro, but when you have 5 Pro Bowls and 84 career regular season touchdowns, that's kind of okay if you don't have an All-Pro. I think that kind of makes up for it. Also, he had 500 career receiving yards in the playoffs with 3 extra touchdowns. So make that well over 9,000 yards with 87? Yeah, 87 touchdowns. It's enough statistically to get in the Hall of Fame. Again, it makes sense why he has to wait so long and why he may have to wait another 10, 15 years before he even gets recognition. But again, the fact he gets actually less recognition that he actually does. Like, if I was a Dolphin fan, like, I'd be pounding on that Mark Clayton belongs in the Hall of Fame drum, just kind of like how I'm a Jaguars fan. I'm like, Jimmy Smith needs to be in the Hall of Fame, right? If I'm a Dolphins fan, I'm getting that urge that, like, yo, Mark Clayton's got to get in the Hall of Fame, you know? Again, he has over 9,000 receiving yards, well over 80 touchdowns. I mean, the 80 touchdowns itself is extremely impressive. If he was a running back and had over 80 touchdowns, he probably would have gotten in by now. But Mark Clayton, absolutely, Hall of Famer. Again, I would put him in before guys like Muhammad, Johnson. But, yeah, again, would I put him over, say, Jimmy Smith or Reggie Wayne? No. Would I put him in over definitely Muhammad Muhammad and Keyshawn Johnson? I'm trying to think of anyone else. I know he has he has more touchdowns than Chad Ochocinco. But I would probably put Ochocinco in the Hall before putting Clayton. So that's just me. I don't know. I kind of get why the reason too. Remember, he also played with Dan Marino and Brett Favre as his 2 main quarterbacks ever. So it also makes sense why his statistics are so great. But I'll give Clayton the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say he is a Hall of Famer. All right, we are moving on to Donald Driver. This is an interesting one. Donald Driver spent his entire career with the Packers. 10,137 receiving yards and 61 touchdowns. 3 Pro Bowls, 1 Super Bowl 45 with Green Bay. Ranked 79th best receiver all time by Pro Football Reference. I think he's a little better than that. But Hall of Famer? Packers Hall of Fame? No question. He actually probably is already in the Packers Hall of Fame, considering he retired in 2012. He had 3 straight 1,200-yard seasons from 2004 to 2006. He has 3 Pro Bowls, but he should probably have more like 5 or 6. 10,000 yards and 61 touchdowns. He is right on the border. But again, I think at the end of the day, if I think guys like Keyshawn Johnson and Muhammad Muhammad are in the Hall of Fame, I think Donald Driver's kind of just in that same exact boat. He did just enough. Although he had better quarterbacks in his career than both of them, which I will say for certain, he was a guy who performed. He was the great wide receiver 1 during that span, like when Antonio Freeman left Green Bay and before the Packers drafted Jordy Nelson. Donald Driver and Greg Jennings put up a show. I didn't put Greg Jennings in this one. Maybe if I eventually get to a part 2, Jennings will probably be on that list. Driver, on the other hand, I mean, he did his job as a capable wide receiver 1 and 2 throughout his entire career, and I think he definitely deserves credit for that. Man, it's like if he had... Like, the thing for me for Mark Clayton was he had the 5 Pro Bowls and the 80 touchdowns, right? If Clayton had those, or rather, if Driver had those, he had the same exact stats, 10,000 yards and 61 touchdowns, but had like 5 or 6 Pro Bowls, I would be leaning more towards yes. But honestly, if you look at his statistics, you really look at his stats and you say, well, how did he make the Hall of Fame in 2004, 2005, maybe even 2009, 1,061 yards and 6 touchdowns, averaging 15.2 yards a reception, which was the best in his career. You have a good debate. Again, if I'm a diehard Packers fan, I am pounding my drum and I am making sure that Driver and do everything I can to make sure Driver gets in the Hall of Fame. whether he's a Hall of Fame player or not. I think at the end of the day, yeah, I would probably induct him. I would say final answer, yes, I would induct Donald Driver. He will still have to wait a long time, again, just like Muhammad and Johnson. He's near the caboose, but would I eventually let him in, like, within the next decade? Probably. All right, moving on to Dwight Clark, the late, great Dwight Clark. Now, Dwight Clark's an interesting one. He retired in 1987, so as much as I hate to say this, if he was going to be in the Hall of Fame, he would have already been inducted, especially after he passed away in 2018. But 2 Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro, 6,750 yards, 48 touchdowns. He did his job being Joe Montana's primary wide receiver, one before Jerry Rice and John Taylor came around. He led the league in receptions in 1982, which was his only All-Pro. 60 receptions for 913 yards and 5 touchdowns. And right there, as you see on the image above, the famous catch, 1981 NFC Championship game against the Dallas Cowboys. Without this play, is Dwight Clark even remembered in NFL history? Are we even having the conversation that he belonged in the Hall of Fame? That's a good debate. I'm not going to lie to you. That's just as good as a debate on if debating on the career he had is enough to get into the Hall of Fame. I will say, 48 regular season touchdowns. You add that up with 3. So you have 51 career receiving touchdowns, including playoff statistics. About 7,400 yards. 2 Super Bowls. He played his entire career with Joe Montana. Which, again, whether that inflates his stats or not, I don't care. Again, the Hall of Fame isn't a what-if game. It's a what we have in front of us game. I think just for NFL history, circumstances, and the fact that this is probably still, if not the most iconic play in NFL history, top 3, along with the fact they did make a couple of Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro, you almost want to put him in the Hall of Fame because, again, based off of, you got to look at the big picture when you talk about Dwight Clark. Based off statistics, is he a Hall of Famer? No. I mean, you could argue if he had like 8,000, 9,000 yards, you think someone like Keyshawn Johnson's a Hall of Famer, then yeah, you could put Dwight Clark in the Hall of Fame, no problem. No one would complain. But again, because he has such a historic factor on the game, it almost seems kind of odd that he's not in the Hall of Fame, especially since we have a lot of fantastic 49ers legends from the 80s in the Hall of Fame. It's like Dwight Clark and Roger Craig are missing out. I already said Craig in my first running back edition. I already said Craig should have been a Hall of Famer 20 years ago. That's kind of the same thing with Clark, like I mentioned before. If he was going to make the Hall of Fame, he would have probably been inducted in the mid to late 90s. He wouldn't have been first ballot or anything, but he would have been inducted by like no later than the late 90s. I think, yeah, that makes sense. From 2000 to 2017, he had the little break where it's like, okay, we have better receivers to put in the Hall of Fame right now, better players overall. We're going to give him a break. Then when he retired, or when he passed away in 2017, that was kind of like his second surge to make the Hall of Fame, if that makes sense. That pretty much amounted to nothing, unfortunately. And again, an NFL legend, maybe a Pro Football Hall of Famer. It's really tough, man. I'm going to say, I'm too kind-hearted. I'm going to say he is a Hall of Famer, but you could definitely make the reason that he's not. I'm going to put it to you this way. If he doesn't make the catch and make an All-Pro, I would say no. Heck, I probably wouldn't even be mentioning him. There's a million receivers that made 2 Pro Bowls and, aren't even thought about making the Hall of Fame. Dwight Clark with the All-Pro and the legendary play favor him towards NFL historians saying, Okay. He does have this iconic moment. He was part of a great 49ers team. He won 2 Super Bowls with them. I think at the end of the day, at least I would put him in the Hall of Fame. You know, whether Clayton does or not, again, I don't think Clayton will, especially, again, if they didn't in the late 90s and they didn't the year after he passed away. I really don't see when they would. But, I mean, if they do, hopefully his wife would accept the Hall of Fame ceremony and whatnot and would deliver a powerful speech, or have Joe Montana deliver a powerful speech, or Jerry Rice, or whatever. But, man, I'd say Dwight Clark's a Hall of Famer, but I can definitely understand why people would say no. Moving on to Julian Edelman, and we're going to make this one so quick it isn't even funny. No! What does he have to his name? 6,822 regular season yards, 36 touchdowns, 3-time Super Bowl champ. Great postseason performer. I'll give him credit. 1,442 yards, 5 touchdowns, Super Bowl 51. Probably the 3rd greatest catch in NFL history behind Dwight Clark, San Antonio Holmes, and David Tyree. So 4th greatest catch of all time. It's tough, man, because I say no, and I'm going to say no because I fully am sticking for the reason where if Edelman never played on the Patriots, he wouldn't have even made it. He wouldn't have even made a career in the NFL. He would have been a rookie out of 2009. He probably would have never transferred as a receiver. He probably would have stayed a quarterback, been a 3rd-string quarterback for 2 years, and would have gone to the CFL and retired after 2013 or whatever. Edelman got lucky. He worked his way up. I'm not saying he got lucky per se, because you know what? He worked his way up from, I believe he was a 6th-round draft pick, made the roster as a return man, and he managed to get over 6,000 receiving yards in his career. But again, the no Pro Bowls for me is the primary reason why I'd say no. If he had 1 or 2 Pro Bowls and 9,000 receiving yards, yeah, maybe I would say yes, because the Super Bowl MVP and just his performance in general, 1,400 receiving yards in general, is incredible. Postseason performer, yes, but you also got to have some regular season moments to put yourself in the Hall of Fame. And basically what I'm saying for this argument is that Edelman lacks the Hall of Fame moments. Moving on to Marquis Colston, Saints receiver. He actually spent his entire career with the Saints, 2006-2015. 72 touchdowns, 9,759 receiving yards, and that was just in the regular season. He had 4 touchdowns and 788 receiving yards in the playoffs. Now, if I said no to Julian Edelman, I got to say no to Marquis Colston. Now, I know he breaks the 10,000-yard receiving barrier, and he should have a couple of Pro Bowls under his belt. But at the end of the day, no Pro Bowls means you aren't going to make it. He's probably the best receiver to have probably never made a Pro Bowl, and I'm being dead honest when I say that. Marquis Colston's the best receiver to never make a Pro Bowl. If not the best, he's somewhere in the top 3. And then Edelman's probably somewhere in the top 5 or 10. But Colston's just, it's like if you put Edelman in the Hall of Fame, then you got to put Colston in. Because Colston, yeah, sure, Edelman was a better playoff performer, but Colston was also twice as much better in the regular season than Edelman was. And he played for significantly longer. I mean, one played with Tom Brady, the other played with Drew Brees. Those are 2 fantastic quarterbacks. Again, if Brees isn't his quarterback, is Colston as good as we think he is? Who knows? He may only have 4,000 career receiving yards, but that's not the point. The point is Drew Brees was his quarterback, and he managed to get over 10,000 yards with him with a Super Bowl. That's kind of the other thing, too. In that Super Bowl, he played well, but, he didn't win Super Bowl MVP or anything. He just had a solid performance, as you should, as a wide receiver, won in every game. And if Colston makes one, maybe I would say if Colston makes at least 2 Pro Bowls, I probably say yes, but again, the no Pro Bowls does it for me. And last but not least, Torry Holt. This is a very interesting one because he's a Jacksonville Jaguar. Now, of course, primarily of the Los Angeles Rams. He led the league in receiving yards twice in 2000, 1,635 yards, and in 2003 with 1,696 yards. Over 13,000 receiving yards, 13,382 with 74 touchdowns. You can add an extra 600 yards to that in the playoffs. That equals up to 32. Yep, that is well over 14,000 receiving yards. 7 Pro Bowls. Somehow only 1 All-Pro. But 7 Pro Bowls. 7 Pro Bowls. A Super Bowl champion. A man who scored the game-winning touchdown in that Super Bowl. Along as a member of the Hall of Fame's All-2000 team? Bro. Joke that Torry Holt isn't in the Hall of Fame. You know me. I saved the best for last. Quarterback edition, I saved Phillip Rivers for last. He was a Hall of Famer. I forget who I had for my first running back video, but I'm sure it was someone who I was banging on the drum saying he should have been a Hall of Famer. I don't know if it was Fred Taylor or not. It might have been. I don't remember, but I don't remember who my first edition of the running back was. The second running back edition, I ended off with Marshawn Lynch, obviously Hall of Famer, and then Torry Holt, obviously Hall of Famer. So basically, spoiler alert, the last guy I bring up is going to be a Hall of Famer, and it's going to be a guy who, even though I think a lot of these guys are well overdue for not being in the Hall of Fame, my last one will always be the most egregious, the most blasphemous, why hasn't this guy been inducted a decade ago? I mean, literally, the guy retired when, 08? I think 08, 09? Retired in 09. Bro, he's been up for the ballot since 2015. Put him in. 7 Pro Bowls. That's all I got to say. 7 Pro Bowls. You add up the playoff statistics, over 14,000 yards. Get Torry Holt in the Hall of Fame. But crying out loud. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of Hall of Famer Hall of Good. Episode 5 hopefully comes out next week. I think I'm going to actually keep this Thursday schedule. I think I'm going to try to do one of these every Thursday up until I go to college, actually. I think that'll be kind of my plan. So, yeah, I guess next week we'll do a tight end edition. Usually I can name off a few players. Again, I haven't done really any research on my Hall of Fame for tight ends. I mean, we know Tony Gonzalez, or rather, we know Antonio Gates and Rob Gronkowski are going to be first ballot Hall of Famers. So I don't really know if I want to include them yet, or if I do, I'm just going to be like, yes, and move on. For obviously both Gates and Gronk. I mean, there is a few. I mean, Jackie Smith, I think he's in the Hall of Fame, but if he's not, he'll be on the list. Todd Heap is one. I'm just trying to do this off the top of my head. I think Keith Jackson was a tight end. He'd be on there. Yeah, again, I haven't done much of my research on the tight ends yet, but I'll obviously make sure that it's a good one, and I'll try to do the best I can on it, as I always do. Mark Chimera, Packers tight end. Yeah, I think I'll include him. Yeah. We'll get to that next week, like I mentioned, so I don't sound like an idiot, because I already think I said Jackie Smith isn't in the Hall of Fame, where I guarantee you he is. Actually, know for a fact he is. I think he got inducted in, what was it, 84? 94. He got inducted in 1994, yeah. So, yeah, I just need to do my research on my tight ends. And, well, yeah, we'll come out with another episode hopefully next week. Hope you guys enjoyed this edition of Hall of Famer Hall of Good, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh, and again, I guess I should wrap it up just to recap for you here. Hall of Fame, Wayne, Smith, Johnson, Hester, Muhammad, Johnson, Ocho Cinco, Clayton, Driver, Clark, and Holt. Not Hall of Famers, Colston, Edelman, and Mike Quick. If you guys enjoyed the video again, the like button for more Hall of Fame or Hall of Goods, and I'll see you guys in the next video.